Battle River Crowfoot.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. And as always, it is an honour to be able to stand in my place to represent the good people of Battle River Crowfoot, and in particular talk about something that is gaining momentum. And that is the conversation surrounding the mismanagement, the abuse of tax dollars, and the unbelievable revelations that $18 million in bonuses were paid out to managers and executives at CBC, even when that organization decided that it would cut frontline workers right before Christmas. So the 8th report of the Standing Committee on Canadian Heritage addressed this very thing and reported back in to this House that it was, and I'll read the motion that we're debating here today because I believe the parliamentary secretary on the other side somewhat acknowledged actually that Conservatives are far better at getting stuff accomplished than the government is, I think is what he was admitting by his previous question. But the motion that we are debating here today is that given the job cuts announced at CBC Radio Canada for the year 2024, it would be inappropriate for the CBC to grant bonuses to executive members. So, Madam Speaker, it is a very simple and straightforward motion and cuts to the heart of where we are seeing the mismanagement at CBC. And certainly when it comes to the issue at hand, when you have a well-placed Liberal appointees getting rich off of tax dollars, and when it comes to the egregious example where job cuts announced just before Christmas, there was the current president of CBC came out, begged for more money, saying there'd be more job cuts if they couldn't get more cash from the government. Yet, unbelievably, they, at that same time, were going through the process of approving $18 million in bonuses, including, although we don't have the specifics because the CEO and the president and CEO of CBC Canada refuses to disclose what both her bonus package was proposed to be, and just like at committee the other week, she refused to tell Canadians what her severance package would be, and she refused further to rule out accepting a severance as her term as the president and CEO of CBC comes to an end. You see that they begged for more money, handed out big bonuses, and yet have the audacity to lay frontline workers off. It is that sort of arrogance, that sort of the attitude that has, by the CEO of CBC, Catherine Tait, her own admission, that the defund argument has gained momentum. Now, maybe she didn't understand the ATIP process, but and for many Canadians who I'm sure are watching this very important debate, any Canadian can ask for information from government. It's through what's called an access to information request. There's a simple form online, and I believe it costs you $5. It's a simple administrative fee. You can ask for information. So in this case, a reporter asked for information about whether or not the CEO of CBC, and it's really virtually unlimited as long as it doesn't have to do with issues of privacy or national security, and there's a few other areas that are exempted from that. But a reporter had asked for information about for communications that the CEO of CBC would have had about the conversations around defunding. And in those emails, it was revealed that the CEO admitted that there was momentum growing to defund CBC television. And certainly when she was confronted with her own words at committee this past week, it was quite interesting to see her response. Instead of acknowledging what she said in a private email, she continued to defend her failed record and that of this Liberal government to the tune of $1.3 billion in subsidies each and every year, millions of dollars in bonuses, a falling ad revenue requiring more taxpayer subsidy. At the same time, you have fewer and fewer Canadians that are watching CBC television. And, Madam Speaker, I would just note, it's interesting because there was this number thrown around at the Heritage Committee, and the CBC talks about 20 million people interacting with their services. Well, any person in this place that has a Facebook page and different social media presence, a website, and of course we all have the content that ends up online through Parleview and other channels. Some of us in this place, in fact, it doesn't take that big of a social media following to have multiple million views over the course of a month, yet the CBC is bragging that they have that 20 million touch points for Canadians, which includes some of the most expensive broadcasting infrastructure in the history of the country, yet there are those in this place, by comparison, that probably have similar reach to some of their content, yet it is done at a far, far less expensive way. So you see increasingly, and my colleague earlier made mention about the key performance indicators, KPIs. Now, most folks, when they hear an acronym like KPI, it doesn't necessarily resonate. But what we found very interesting is that when the last fiscal year, so 22-23, the last full fiscal year prior to the one that we just completed, there was the key performance indicators of CBC, they fulfilled, I believe it was 3 of 14 key performance indicators that were the metrics that CBC itself said would determine that it was successful in fulfilling its mandate. So it's a little bit like the student grading their own paper, and even they admitted that they were failing at doing so. But when it comes to what I would suggest would be common sense, is that when you're failing, you make changes. Well, they did make a change, and I'll admit that. But the change was not to improve what they're doing. It was to change the way that they evaluate how they're doing. So, Madam Speaker, we have a circumstance where the student was grading their own paper, and they acknowledged that they failed the first go-around, but instead of making changes to ensure that they stop failing in the future, they simply changed the metric to which they evaluated their poor performance in the past. And the result of that comes back to this. It comes back to cash. Cash in the pockets of executives. To the tune, Madam Speaker, if you can believe this, to the average executive, of which there are 43, and when I saw 43 executives, I thought that must be a typo. 43 executives at the public broadcaster? Like, give me a break. However, when it comes to the average of the bonus, $71,000 average for the bonus of each executive, to the tune of more than $3 million. Madam Speaker, at a time when Canadians are hurting, food bank usage has reached historic levels, home prices have doubled, the cost of everything is becoming unaffordable for regular Canadians, and the average Canadian makes less than what a CBC executive would have received in a bonus. How out of touch is that? And then to add insult to injury, they also told the president and CEO, those executives and the managers that receive bonuses went to frontline staff at CBC before Christmas, nonetheless, and said, I'm sorry, your effort here isn't appreciated. I keep my job and my bonus, you lose yours. Go home and tell your family that. The arrogance is astounding. The mismanagement is such a reflection of what we see in the benches of this Liberal cabinet, where they would take for themselves, but literally put out on the street, hardworking men and women, those who actually do the work, while those who claim to make the decisions get rich. So after 9 years, Madam Speaker, we have seen that a failing performance virtually across the spectrum at CBC, lower ad revenue, lower viewers. In fact, the number of viewers that CBC gets is they're going to have to start changing the key performance indicator for that if they're even able to report it. And we see increasingly that Canadians are simply not wanting to watch the content that CBC is producing. That's the simple fact of the matter. So when it comes down to it, it's time for common sense. It is time to defund the CBC and ensure that bonuses are not paid out to rich executives at the same time that they are cutting frontline workers. Now, we get very political in this place, and we're politicians in a parliament. But, Madam Speaker, let me conclude with this by saying I hope that we can find unity in this place about cancelling the bonuses for executives when frontline workers saw their jobs cut.
Questions and comments, the Honourable Parliamentary Secretary, the Government House Leader.
Madam Speaker, I'll get the opportunity to address the Chamber on a wide variety of issues reflecting on CBC, but the specific question I have for the member is a shell shock moment for the member from Lethbridge when she was questioned in regards to CBC radio and really not necessarily knowing what to say, came back with the response, well, I kind of support the leader of the Conservative Party. And we're a little unclear. Can the member opposite provide a 100% guarantee that the Conservatives will not touch CBC radio? Will he provide that commitment now?
For Crowfoot.
You know what's interesting, Madam Speaker, is over the last number of days we've seen chaos in the Liberal ranks. So I see, I believe there's 152, although it's quickly diminishing because they keep losing these by-elections. And more MPs seem to be resigning all the time, announcing that they won't be running again and whatnot. But, Madam Speaker, I think there's a very, very interesting question that parliamentary secretary needs to answer. Was his name one of the 24 that have called for his boss to take a hike, to take a walk in the snow, a walk in the sand, whatever kind of walk it is, to walk out of the doors of this place so that we can restore some resemblance of integrity and accountability back to the institution that is Canada's Parliament, as opposed to a guy that seems to care about nothing more than power and the perks that come along with it. Madam Speaker, when it comes to the questions that Canadians want answers to, was that member one of the 24 to telling his boss to go take a hike?
Questions.
The Honourable Member for Saint-Hyacinthe-Bagotte. Thank you, Madam Speaker. While significant cuts are being made that affects many workers, many cuts, especially in French, it's a cultural disaster. But at the same time, we hear that bonuses have been made, and that's what I heard. I heard a number which I find rather shocking. I'm not sure that I heard the number. What was the average bonus given? Because it seemed shocking.
Député de Battle River Crowfoot.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. And so there's a number of numbers there, so I'll unpack them very, very quickly. One, there was $18 million in bonuses total paid out to executives, managers, and out-of-scope non-unionized employees. However, when it comes to the specifics around the executives, the average of $71,000 for the 73 executives at CBC. And certainly when it comes to, as that member mentioned, the Liberals like to accuse other parties of being the ones to make cuts, yet it's them that are cutting French language reporting. It is the Liberals that are making cuts that are devastating cultural organizations across this country. So when it comes to the numbers, those are the numbers. About $3.1 million went to executives. Those 43 executives, the average was about $71,000 each. But, Madam Speaker, these Liberals would far prefer to make cuts to frontline employees and pay out their rich friends. That, Madam Speaker, is shameful.
Questions and comments? The Honourable for Timmins, James Bay.
Thank you. Well, we have yet another day of a full-on attack of the independents on Canadian media. We saw them at the Conservative leader attack Global. We saw him attack Canadian Press. We saw him go after the Toronto Star, the vicious attack on CTV, and of course the CBC. But all this is happening as questions are being raised about why that member cannot get security clearance. And there's an article from October 23rd, this past week, in the Globe and Mail, where the member for Wellington Halton Hills explains. He says, security checks involve a rigorous process that includes checks on family members, credit and criminal checks, and questions about one's sexual partners or wherever they have used drugs. That is not a reason that a man can hide from getting a security clearance so that we don't find out whether or not his family have been involved in criminal activities. And yet the member for Wellington Halton Hills goes on to say that the Prime Minister should reach out and just tell the member for Stornoway so he doesn't have to expose himself. Simple question. What is it that the Conservatives are so afraid of exposing in the member for Stornoway's background?
The Honourable for Battle River Crowfoot.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. And I find it interesting that member has such great trust and admiration for that Prime Minister. But here's the reality. That Prime Minister doesn't actually have security clearance. that Prime Minister has security clearance by nature of the position. He did not grant himself that security clearance. It is by the nature of the position that he holds that he has it. He could, and that Prime Minister is able to declassify the information, release the 11 names. Conservatives have made it very, very clear that we want that information made public so that Canadians can know. So when it comes to the cheap shots that member makes often in this place, Madam Speaker, I would simply conclude by saying this. Release the names so that Canadians can make the choice, as opposed to playing politics like that Prime Minister and the soon-to-be former member from Timmins James Bay is doing.
So I just want to remind members they've had an opportunity to ask a question.